Hello again, and welcome to the BeamG podcast. Today we are going to talk more or less in general about writing stories. So, what can we say about writing stories? Well, every author has their own unique process. I'm pretty sure of that. There's no right or wrong way to write, or read for that matter, a work of fiction. For an author, the main thing is just to sit down and get on with it. Fiction refers to made-up accounts of events which feature characters which are probably invented. So fiction is a fabrication by a creator or an author who pretends that the related story actually happened as presented. So for our purposes, the genre or form or medium is irrespective. What we're looking at, we postulate the principles behind this kind of fabrication. Whether the finished work is a novel or a movie or drama or an epic poem or a radio play. Indeed, fabrication in the sense of invention is also not really the main concern, since whether the material is wholly made up or steeped in fact or history is not so relevant. What we're investigating is dramaturgy, the process of developing and arranging story material. So we'll discover, as we go on in this series, exactly what a story consists of. And that will hopefully help us to understand how to compose and write fiction and other types of narrative, such as memoirs. So consider this podcast basically as like a gardening manual for growing not plants, but stories. So your ideas are the seeds that will eventually bloom if you treat them right. Now, many authors start by writing the beginning of the story and working their way through to the end. This seems intuitive, since it mirrors the way that narratives are normally received, like from opening to resolution. Furthermore, it allows a development of the material that feels natural, starting probably with a setting and a character or two and growing in complexity as the story progresses. But it isn't the only way to get a story written. The author is not the recipient, after all. The author is the creator. The creative habits of the processes of fabricating or composing a story seem to differ according to medium. Most professional screenwriters spend a lot of time working out the intricacies of plot and the complexities of character before beginning to actually write the screenplay. Some novelists, on the other hand, seem to require the writing process in order to get to grips with the material. For such authors, the act of working on text is so intimately intertwined with the craft of dramaturgy that the shaping of the story has to be performed more or less simultaneously with the writing of it. So they distill that final story out of the many manuscript drafts. But as I said, it's different for everyone and everything is okay. What about flow? In some cases, a writer might have a fairly clear idea in mind where the story is headed, or already be aware of certain key scenes that ought to be included. In other cases, the author may not know how the story ends, and instead she just writes down what she imagines as fancy dictates. During such a writing process, it might begin to feel like the characters are determining the action, and the author is merely capturing the story rather than actively creating it. Artists get so deeply immersed in the creative process that their entire consciousness is involved, and the outside world is temporarily excluded. Authors refer to the flow state. Usually this is attributed to the act of writing, but it may just as easily occur during the act of creating a world, structuring a plot, or developing a character, when you're so engrossed in outlining or planning. Both language and dramaturgy are at one and the same time art as well as craft. both writing a beautiful text and shaping a compelling story require intuition and talent, as well as technique and craft and practice. In any case, it's possible to get lost in the moment and dive so deeply into the process that externals are locked out and creativity flows. One often hears of the distinction between plotting and pantsing. The difference between writing and conceiving has led to this popular duality of the plotters versus the pantsers. Plotters map the outline of the plot more or less exactly before beginning to actually write. Pantsers write by the seat of their pants, making it up as they go. I think the distinction is probably spurious. Some plotters may find that their plots meander or even veer strongly off the course they had planned in the outline. Some pantsers, on the other hand, may actually have a much clearer outline in their heads than they care to admit, but just refrain from writing it down first. Either way, it seems indisputable that narrative structure is more satisfying when the story ends with a resolution to the problems it opened with. For the reader, or for the recipient, that is. Furthermore, readers and audiences tend to expect all the loose ends to be neatly tied up by the end of the story. So with which writing process the author achieves this feat is, for the audience, irrelevant. In any case, a certain amount of revision and rewriting is inevitable. Having said that, at least in theory, the pantser is likely to spend far more time rewriting than the plotter. Why? Probably most because of foreshadowing. What's foreshadowing? Well, every detail is a prophecy, as Jorge Luis Borges, the Argentinian writer, put it. Every episode in a careful narrative is a premonition, he said. Every detail a prophecy. A famous example of foreshadowing, or you can also call it setup payoff, is Chekhov's gun. So when a gun is seen in Act 1, it is clear that it will go off before the end of the story. Unlike readers, authors must work backwards. If a gun is fired at the climax, then it makes sense to drop clues earlier in the narrative that this will happen. The emotional effect on the reader or the audience is significantly greater if important events are set up beforehand, are foreshadowed. Hence, after the first draft, an author may go over the manuscript to find suitable places to drop such clues and place the setups and premonitions, the prophecies. However, careful authors who know where the narrative is heading include the setups, the foreshadowing, in the narrative as constituent parts. They plan the prophetic details as integral elements of the story. In this way, such details feel less conspicuous and more organic to the audience. Foreshadowing, the setup payoff, is one of the most important technical aspects of storytelling. But we'll get to that in greater detail some other time in this podcast. What I want to talk about now briefly is scenes and arguments. So not arguments, but in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Instead of writing from beginning to end, some authors begin by writing particular scenes that are already clear to them. If an idea for a certain plot event is already established in your head or elsewhere, there's no reason not to write it, even if you don't yet know how it fits into the overall scheme of the story. If you, for instance, have a vision of a man in a suit standing alone in a vast flat expanse of fields, and he is attacked by an initially harmless-seeming, very distant crop duster plane, then why not write that scene or sequence down? If you don't know yet that the character's name is Roger Thornhill and the plane is being piloted by an assassin sent by a foreign agent named Van Damme, well, work that out later. Okay, so that's from North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock. Some writers and some authors write more or less detailed arguments, which are like abstracts or summaries of the chapters or the sections in a work of prose. This provides a specific outline as text, explaining what happens and making clear all the patterns of cause and effect that make the narrative cohesive. Writing arguments, like little brief summaries of each chapter or each scene before you write the entire work, is often a really good idea. Text versus story. It's quite possible to work on a narrative without great amounts of text. Outlining on a corkboard, for instance, with index cards that stand for plot events is a popular way of shaping story structure and determining the dramaturgy. Furthermore, a story is based on the actions of characters, and these actions occur due to decisions they make. Therefore, working on the dramatic function of the characters in the story is really a must for any author. Whichever is your workflow, it can't be wrong if it works for you. If the story gets finished, you're doing something right. If it then appeals to readers or audiences, you've done a whole lot more right. What matters is the end result. Thanks for listening.